So it's now been a few weeks since the story broke that dire wolves have been, quote, de-extincted by the biotech company Colossal. And I have to say, some of the criticism that followed has been very satisfying to see. Almost as satisfying as the backlash garnered by the pseudo-pro-feminism, Richie Rich and celebrity-powered Blue Origin flight. Especially in today's volatile climate, it's incredibly important to have skepticism. I mean, we have misinformation and half-truths peddled towards us all the time. And when it comes to slickly curated promotions from billionaire-backed companies, it's just even more essential we don't blindly accept them. For that reason, I'm thrilled we're having a conversation about these important concepts, and it seems that Colossal, ever so interestingly fixated on achieving mainstream approval, is continuing to employ social media to self-advocate. Colossal has a YouTube channel, and their chief science officer, molecular biologist Beth Shapiro, has for all intents and purposes clapped back in the most subdued use of that word possible to another popular YouTuber, science communicator Hank Green of Hank's channel. Despite his immense popularity, I didn't know who he was, but then I found out he actually partnered with and helped launch the YouTube channel Animal Wonders, a channel featuring many captive exotic pets, some rescued, others not so much, that I'm very familiar with. So Green made a video about dire wolves that pretty much encapsulated the very valid criticism they faced. I agree with essentially everything he said on the subject. Beth Shapiro posted her response to this video on Colossal's YouTube channel, to discuss points he made in his video. She wasn't necessarily treating it like she was calling him out, but I think I detected a little, just a dash of shade in some of her statements, but not enough to make it obvious, so people are praising her for having a level-headed and respectful conversation. But let's be real, a scientist should never be engaging in anything but that when it comes to these topics. That's just one of the reasons why holding the title of a scientist commands respect. A scientist should conduct civil discourse with other scientists and lay people, and most importantly, argue their stance solely based on the strength of the evidence. They should strive to be as accurate as possible. They should also be willing to admit if the information they put out is incorrect or misleading. Did she do that? Well,
there's a biotechnology company called Colossal that is attempting to de-extinct various animals, and they have just claimed that they have de-extincted their first animal, not just their first animal, the first animal to ever be de-extincted. And that claim does not, in my opinion, hold up to scrutiny.
Well, let's talk about what de-extinction really means. The IUCN Species Survival Commission defines de-extinction as, quote, the process of creating an organism that resembles an extinct species. So according to that definition, we do believe it's accurate to call this the world's first de-extinction.
Okay, so as soon as I heard this, I just threw my hands up in the air. No, Beth, that is not what de-extinction really means. It just can't be. I don't care what the IUCN says. I don't care if a high-ranking scientist said that. There's just no way that creating an organism that resembles an extinct species is what the term de-extinction should refer to. I'm all about making scientific definitions that make consistent sense. It's why the general theme of my channel is challenging the invalid idea of domestication. I mean, let's break it down. Extinction means beyond reasonable doubt that the species is no longer extant. And extinct means after exhaustive surveys, the last known individual has died, right? Okay, we all agree with that. And well, then we have the prefix D, which means away, reverse. You get the idea. So if we were to de-extinct something, that would mean we'd undo what has happened, which can only mean that the actual animal that went extinct became unextinct. This is a reasonable definition that I think both the general public and scientists can all agree with, because I had no idea why a respected entity like the IUCN would come up with a definition like that. I went straight to the source. The paper that Beth is referring to does kind of say this: the prospect of species de-extinction, defined as the process of creating an organism that resembles an extinct species. But wait, see note on terminology below? What note? She didn't mention a note. Here we go. Note on terminology. The term de-extinction is misleading in its implication. What? Misleading? Yes, that's what it says. The term de-extinction is misleading in its implication that extinct species for which no viable members remain, can be resurrected in their genetic, behavioral, and physiological entirety. These guidelines proceed on the basis that none of the current pathways will result in a faithful replica of any extinct species due to genetic, epigenetic, behavioral, physiological, and other differences. For the purposes of these guidelines, the legitimate objective for the creation of a proxy of an extinct species is the production of a functional equivalent able to restore ecological functions or processes that might have been lost as a result of the extinction of the original species. Proxy is used here to mean a substitute that would represent in some sense, e.g. phenotypically, behaviorally, ecologically, another entity, the extinct form. So it is clearly articulated here that the IUCN's use of the word de-extinction does not support Shapiro's claim that these are dire wolves, but that they are some sort of proxy that bears some resemblance to the original entity. The purpose of this is not to replicate the animal, but to create something entirely new that may fulfill the original animal's role in a certain ecosystem, one that no longer exists, I should add. It should be noted that Colossal's dire wolves are not currently doing that, and likely never will. They will be captive, free-roaming pets, essentially. We have no idea at this point if they are functional. So I don't even think, according to what the IUCN is saying here, that the word de-extinction can be used. They have 3 animals that are not living wild, fulfilling any role, and I don't believe there are plans to accomplish this, nor should there be. But this is just another reason why the IUCN's supposed definition, even in the context with their note, is nonsensical. If an animal simply just needs to resemble something, we will have no idea if it adequately fulfills the role of the species it superficially resembles. There is also no information on how closely the animals must resemble that species. That vagueness opens the door for a lot of craziness. I'm just amazed that someone of Beth Shapiro's caliber as a high-ranking molecular biologist left this out to defend the claims of her company, which, as Hank said, doesn't stand up to scrutiny at all. She's acting like she didn't even read this, or maybe she hopes no one will. I mean, this is huge. We will never be able to resurrect extinct animals, and the public needs to be aware of this. These will be proxies or unfortunate, unfaithful imitations. Somehow knowing this makes extinction even sadder. Was Colossal upfront with what their version of de-extinction really means when they presented their information to the public? Did they say that in the same vein as the woolly mice, we just resurrected extinct traits on a gray wolf to create something that might look and act like a dire wolf? Or did they just say, these are dire wolves? Look everyone, they're back from extinction.
Because if you could say that a species was created here, it is a species that has never existed before.
I actually agree with that at some level, but then we have to explain how we define a species, and biologists tend to disagree about that a lot.
Absolutely true. I went down the rabbit hole of trying to figure out when an animal is considered a separate species, and quite frankly, I got no clear answer whatsoever. That, however, does not mean you get to generate something that simply resembles a species and call it the same species under any circumstances. I'd argue that our confusion regarding the classification of species can only occur when addressing natural evolutionary processes, where organisms are directly responding to environmental selective pressures and epigenetic changes. And if you follow my videos, you've also heard me say that these selective pressures are also present in captivity and may lead to unintentional domestication as well. These dire wolf proxies have been generated without these mechanisms, so they are truly artificial outliers lacking any of the meaningful developments and evolutionary history that makes a species what it is. What I wonder though is why Colossal, instead of making something like woolly mice, didn't attempt this with known species of animals. Why didn't they take, for instance, genetic material from a mouse and genetically edit that into a rat? Then we, as the general public, can truly see this technology in action. Would this proxy rat look and act exactly like a rat? These are similar looking but completely different species, as anyone who's owned both would know. And if they did do something like that, present that first, so we can really get an idea of what we're dealing with. We'll truly get to witness what these genetic changes are and how it affects a species.
Some scientists have estimated that by 2050, half of all species that are alive today will be extinct.
I don't know that any scientists have made this claim. It would be really weird to me if they had, but I'm gonna Google it. So here it is. Biologists think 50% of species will be facing extinction by the end of the century. Currently, 1 in 10 are facing extinction.
Good correction. Yes, 50% of species could be in danger of becoming extinct by 2050. That's embarrassing.
You know what? It really is. I mean, look at these credentials. I would have expected more from someone whose career is dedicated to evolutionary biology. Scientists know better than to recite things like statistics and other facts without looking to ensure it's actually accurate. Throwing out a factoid like this without fact-checking is what I'd expect from a layperson.
I don't see any reason why these animals would not be considered gray wolves. They are genetically modified gray wolves. If you would consider them a separate species, then you would have to consider them a synthetic species, and you would not consider them to be a species or even a relative, really, of direwolves. But whatever.
The discussion about what exactly to call them shows just how messy the world of biology can be. And I don't actually see an end to it. As you say, we are going to be having this same conversation from now and into forever.
I don't think anyone is confused about what to call these. Most seem to agree that these are modified gray wolves.
Like any classification system, species concepts are only as useful as they are when applying them makes sense to the actual question.
I just want to say that this is true of the word domestication as well. It seems like a word that morphs depending on the context of which it's used. In my area of particular interest, it is used to label my own animals as improper to be owned as pets. However, the word offers nothing consistent to describe both groups of animals. In the case of the word species and de-extinction, clearly the original species has not had its extinction reversed or even its ecological role. Placing some man-made novel species in its place, that kind of looks like it. Would that not be the same thing as introducing non-native animals? Something we've done before and have had some miserable consequences?
So let's ask, what is the purpose here? Why are people upset that we called our direwolves direwolves?
Because they are absolutely not direwolves. With her loose definition of what constitutes a species, we may as well eliminate the concept of subspecies and all this intricate way of looking at organisms, because hey, if it looks like a duck, it's a duck. Therefore, why even have protections for certain groups of animals that look just like others? It's way more important to let the public know that extinction is forever.
If you want to call them proxy direwolves, go for it. But this is a very good explanation of the goal.
She says this like we're being needlessly pedantic or something. Go for it? You should go for it too. The paper you based your entire argument for calling this de-extinction also says they should be called proxies.
But if we want to talk about the risk of trying to do something, we also have to talk about the risk of doing nothing.
Who said we're doing nothing? One of the criticisms Colossal faced was that of redirecting attention away from traditional conservation efforts, such as habitat restoration, which is essential. What good are these species, I mean proxies, if they have nowhere to live? Reversing this issue is something Colossal is not focusing on, and probably most animals that are in danger of extinction could have this issue resolved if the habitat loss stopped. Sadly, it's not so simple.
So we now know that gray wolves are indeed closer genetically to direwolves than jackals are. But you couldn't have known that because the paper wasn't publicly available yet. Unfortunately, the New Yorker broke our embargo and posted this story before we were ready. Ideally, we would have been able to show that paper at the same time that we announced the de-extinction of the direwolf. That was the plan all along, and all of the content explaining the project was prepared with that in mind. So, yes, given the information available to you at the time, your correction statement in your second video would have been right. But now we have more information, and you can read all about it on bioRxiv while the paper is being peer-reviewed.
Here's an idea. How about not making announcements that challenge our current understanding of a scientific topic before the research has completed the peer review process?
When we selected the gray wolf as the surrogate, we considered lots of things. We've talked about genetic and morphological similarities, but we also considered accessibility and what scientific information we could leverage. Things like comparative genomic data, husbandry and veterinary protocols, behavioral and health data, even plans for rewilding. Gray wolves were the clear choice as a surrogate species because this existing research infrastructure helps enable keener insight into scientific outcomes and better animal welfare outcomes.
It's interesting that she talks about using the gray wolf as a surrogate after telling us that they are the closest living relative of the dire wolf. The latter would have been the only justification needed for using wolves, but now it seems like there is an incentive to focus on using wolves beyond that. And when she talks about enhanced animal welfare, which I'm guessing means developing animals without harmful traits, one wonders if they've had some animals born with these in past attempts, and how will this be addressed when they use less understood surrogate species like the thylacine.
They're not trying to de-extinct anybody, they're trying to create this blob that fits into the right Jenga spot, and so they want to find the genes that help the blob be the right shape to fit in.
Cool, but that actually is the definition of de-extinction that the IUCN SSN came up with in 2016. I'm just saying.
She just keeps saying this. She keeps hiding behind this ridiculous definition from the IUCN that even they admit is completely misleading as an excuse to give the public misleading information.
If you want to call these gray wolves with 20 genetic edits reflecting direwolf traits, You can totally do that. You can call them proxy direwolves or colossal direwolves. No issue here. And not to oversimplify the topic, but if you ask somebody what Jurassic Park is about, they usually say dinosaurs. They don't say frogs that have been genetically modified to resemble dinosaurs.
So once again, we have the scientific expert, and she's using a Hollywood movie to justify her company's misinformation. I have to say that, given Jurassic Park is, well, complete fiction, I didn't even pay much attention to how those characters were created. What I grasped from that process is that they used actual dinosaur DNA from mosquitoes. Therefore, given my layperson understanding, it's the real animal using frogs in some magical, science-y way to bring forth life. But maybe she's right. We call them dinosaurs, even though they're not only not dinosaurs, they aren't even real animals. They're just CGI and robotic creations. I mean, what a silly argument. And calling synthetic dinosaurs dinosaurs is still not equivalent to calling a genetic hybrid wolf a specific extinct species of wolf. It's not like we're saying they're not wolves after all. Using Beth's own logic, it depends on the context. People would be casually calling Jurassic Park's creatures dinosaurs. They only care about the definition of dinosaur insofar that it means it is a large, reptilian-looking creature with sharp teeth that will devour a lawyer off a toilet for their entertainment.
There are a ton of potential use cases in conservation that we're interested in pursuing. For example, in Australia, there is an introduced cane toad that secretes a toxin that's deadly to just about every endemic predator. Interestingly, predators in South America, where the cane toad evolved, have some immunity because those predators had millions of years to evolve ways to deal with the toxin. By tweaking just one gene, one base even, in the critically endangered northern quoll to mimic the version of the gene that evolved in South America, we've shown that we can actually make that population 3,000 times more resistant to cane toad toxin. Think about that.
So yeah, that's a funny thing about cane toads. It needs to be mentioned that the reason we have this huge issue with these frogs is because the sugarcane industry, with the help of scientists, intentionally released them to control a beetle that was decimating the crops. Introducing a non-native species, what can go wrong? Of course, back then there was less oversight, but the parallels can't be ignored. If any of Colossal's animals are going to be reintroduced to the wild, that would essentially be placing a new species, a non-native one, into the environment and hoping for the best. One could only imagine the dramatic impacts of adding a non-native elephant-like creature back into nature, which is apparently one of Colossal's goals with the proxy woolly mammoth. You know, I just don't trust this company. It just seems really, really convenient that there is a nice excuse for using charismatic animals as their main goals. I mean, you have the whole dire wolf thing and the Game of Thrones author being involved, and the company's next goals are very familiar megafauna popularized in the mainstream instead of lesser-known species that have gone extinct more recently. I wish we could have seen a proxy passenger pigeon first. That's one of the few animals I think we can justify using these methods for, because the story of that animal is just devastating. They were just relentlessly hunted by ignorant dunces, sometimes tens of thousands per day in one area, and when people began to notice they were disappearing, they just kept killing them. Their annihilation is entirely the fault of frivolous human activity, and they vanished recently enough so that we have some real understanding of how they behaved. They are also pretty similar to some existing species, so you have plenty of surrogate choices. Yet the company is focusing on what seems to be more lucrative species when it comes to tourism and familiarity, like the dodo bird. They have crafted a reason why woolly mammoths would be beneficial for the environment, saying that they would help the soil or something, but I'm having a hard time buying that this is the real reason they've been chosen and focused on. Just like when zoos try to convince the public they are largely conservation centers, other than places for humans to enjoy seeing unusual animals, which there is absolutely nothing wrong with. But many people, for reasons believe otherwise. I'm just getting these vibes that these are misleading excuses. Add to that instead of having public conversations with other experts and scientists so far, they've decided to engage with Hank Green, which I think is obviously due to his massive following more than anything else. And they use this YouTuber-friendly approach. It just rubs me the wrong way. It's obvious their technological innovations are going to be miraculous for other causes. I guess only time will tell whether or not the scientific integrity of this company is intact.